Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagel. I'm the CEO of Metal Blade Records. You can go look us up on the internet if you don't know who I am already. Hopefully you do. We have a new sponsor here at 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. It's the Metal Blade Museum and Store, located in Las Vegas, Nevada, right near the Strip. We have a ton of stuff in there from 43 years of Metal Blade. We've got Metallica stuff, we've got Slayer stuff, we've got Gwar, we've got Lizzie Borden. We've got tons and tons of stuff in there. We've got vinyl that you can look at for old stuff. We've got a ton of artifacts. We also have a lot of metal bands, too, that Metal Blade has worked with, like Deep Purple and Alice Cooper and Stars and Guns N' Roses and Thin Lizzy. So there's a lot of great artifacts there. It really is the ultimate heavy metal museum. And recently, we also have moved our Metal Blade retail store into the museum. So that's in the first part. When you first walk in, the store is there. Free to get into the store. You got to pay to get into the museum. But for more information, go to metalblade.com/museum. This is going to be a fun one. I'm really excited about this. Foghat was a huge influence for me growing up in the 70s, and just such an amazing band. And to me, definitely one of the founding fathers of the bedmark that music that defines heavy metal. So it's really great to have them on today and talk to the great Roger Earl from Foghat about a really cool song called Easy Money, which was kind of a little fast for the time as well. We've talked about, fast music in the past, and you wouldn't really think Foghat, but Foghat is. And again, one of those bands where if you talk to 90% of all metal bands, especially anybody that came from the 70s and 80s, huge influence on everybody. So it'll be fun to talk to him. But as always, we're going to begin with our friend in Toronto, Canada, Mr. Martin Popoff.
All right, nice choice, Brian. Foghat, Easy Money. Boy, I wonder if it's just you and me think about songs like this. It's pretty cool. But yeah, this is a pretty extreme, pretty heavy song off of the Stone Blue album, which isn't that heavy. This album was a little bit of a disappointment to me. My favorite Foghat albums in order are Night Shift and then Fool for the City. But I do love Stone Blue, and I love the title track. So, of course, we've got Night Shift in 76. We've got the live album, which is a big hit album for them, double platinum in 77. And then this is the follow-up, kind of in the same vein, I suppose, May 1978. I always considered this the sister album to Night Shift because the album covers are kind of similar in look and tone and color kind of thing. But yeah, this is the seventh album for Foghat. This is a rare sort of speed metal. Well, they do some fast things, but this is actually a true sort of speed metal song for them. It's got only a hint of a kind of boogie structure to the riffing to it. Yeah, I guess it is kind of circular and boogie, but it is more pure heavy metal. It's got a very strafing, distorted guitar tone on what Dave Pevert does here. Dave is the lone writer of it. Of course, he's singing it as well. But yeah, it's got that really cool dropped beat that goes on, and it's got some double bass in it as well, which is pretty cool to see. So this is definitely a proto speed metal song from a band that you never really consider part of the Destruction, but it's Dave Pevert on rhythm guitar and vocals, the great Rod Price, sadly no longer with us, on lead guitar. And I think Roger does a spirited job of the drumming here, but I think the secret weapon on this Easy Money song is Craig McGregor and that great bass line and those kind of cool bass pulls that he does throughout. So yeah, by far the heaviest song on a pretty damn good Foghat album, Stone Blue, from May 1978.
Thanks, Martin. I'm glad that we see eye to eye on this. By the way, I don't ever tell him what songs we're doing. We just give him the songs and he comes up with his stuff. So, but I'm glad that both of our tastes seem to align, which is good because he's a legendary writer. As if you don't already know, he's written 150 books about hard rock and heavy metal. I don't know how. I've written 2 books, and that took way too much of my time, so I don't know how you can write that many. But kudos to him for doing it, and kudos for him for coming on and always talking good stuff. We welcome it.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
Again, our good friend, the producer extraordinaire. He's worked with Avatar, Amon Amarth, Anthrax, Armored Saints, Stone Sour, Corey Taylor. I could go on for the next hour to list all of his credits. But anyway, Jay Ruston, how are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me here, Brian. I didn't realize I produced so many bands that started with the letter A. That's pretty funny.
That is true, actually.
Yeah. Foghat, easy money.
Super excited for this. I was a massive Foghat fan. When they came out, I used to see them live all the time, and this song really awesome that I get to talk to Roger Earl, which is super cool. And he actually picked this song. I gave him a list of like 3 or 4 songs to pick, and he picked this song, which I was very happy about because for me, I think this is definitely the heaviest Foghat song. And like we talked about recently with Exciter from Judas Priest, it's also a pretty fast song, and it came out the same year as Exciter in 1978.
Incredible, and double bass, recorded at Rockfield in Wales, the famous studio where everybody records. One thing about Foghat I've always loved is the bass sound. They always have a killer bass guitar sound, and it's always really present in the mix. I've covered Foghat songs with the Donnas, the all-girl amazing rock band. We did Fool for the City. I love Foghat. And I was very surprised to see Eddie Kramer's name on this record. I didn't realize he produced it, mainly because it sounds really good. And, Eddie isn't known for like the big bottom end and everything. Like a lot of his stuff can be a little thin. So it surprised me. And that could be Rockfield too. That's a very thumpy sounding room. Maybe it's just partly that too,
I'm like you. I kind of forgot about that Eddie Kramer did this record. I was like, oh, it kind of makes sense because it does sound like an Eddie Kramer produced record from the 70s. When I listen to it, I go, oh, it sounds a lot like those Kiss records. But yeah, you have the bass. In fact, Martin Popoff mentioned it when he was talking about this at the beginning, about how amazing the bass is on this song. And the bass player was phenomenal. I could imagine that. I'm sure that was a big part of it because he was a big part of the band and a big part of the production where you had the twin, guitars going and all that stuff. But the bass was always there. And you're right. To be honest with you, when I first started listening to music, I didn't even know what the bass was or what it did because all I hear are guitar, drums, and vocals. What is a bass guitar when I was 13 years old? But this is one where you actually really do hear the bass and it kind of continues along with the drums to run that song. I love the production. I think it's nice and clean. It definitely reminds me of a very 1970s Eddie Kramer production with the crunchy guitars, and it works.
It's got killer bottom end. I love how upfront the bass is, but that's a Foghat signature, as you said. Clearly, their bass player was such an important part of their sound, and he wrote great bass lines. But I know that from research I've done, they really butted heads with Eddie. So I'm curious to get more details on that, if there is any, because it was sort of one and done with him. I think you either get producers that only work with a band once, or they do 5 or 10 of their albums.
Full disclosure, I haven't talked to Roger yet, but I will, obviously. So I'm curious to see about that too. What was that? If he wants to share any of that or not, but I do want to ask it. But it is documented. If you look on research, it's pretty well documented that the band and Eddie didn't really see eye to eye on stuff, which is interesting because I think the record sounds great, but it also. Some people have speculated, and this is a very commonplace thing, whatever band's headspace is when they're making a record is going to intercede into the songwriting and the playing. And certainly this is a pretty heavy record for Foghat. This song especially is pretty heavy. The tension between the producer and the band might have egged them on to be even a little more heavier.
Could be, and it might be that he was maybe trying to push them to be a little more commercial because of his commercial success with Kiss up to that point. No producer that's had commercial success wants to make a record that's then not commercially successful. Maybe it was that. It's hard to say, but I'd be very curious to know. But other than that, you're right. It's just an extremely heavy song. I love the drums. They sound great. It sort of made me reevaluate my opinion of Eddie, realizing he did this record. I know this record. I've listened to it many times. Just didn't realize he did it.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of forgot about it too. And then I was like, oh, that's right, Eddie Kramer did. And then listening to it afterwards, though, like I said earlier, it does sound a lot like an Eddie Kramer record to me. And I've always loved the way Eddie produced and stuff. So obviously, being a huge Kiss fan, he, did most of my favorite Kiss records. So I'm a little biased in that regard. And I could see why they would get him to produce, because it just seems like, okay, Eddie did all this great stuff with Kiss and, a lot of other hard rock bands. So why not get him in with Foghat, but maybe it was the English American thing. Like I said, hopefully we'll talk a little bit with Roger. But again, those sort of tensions can make for great art, and it certainly did with this song.
Absolutely. And yeah, it could just be the fact that Eddie was very hot at this moment. 1978? How many hit records had he done with Kiss at this point and other artists? Obviously the Hendrix stuff was many years before, but just legendary. So I think any band, even up into the 80s, Anthrax used him for Among the Living. People wanted to work with him. There's like a lore when you work. It's like wanting to meet Mutt Lange or Ron Nevison or Glyn Johns. The lore of meeting these people is always there. It's still there.
You mentioned the drum sound, which is really great. And obviously it's an honor for me to talk to Roger. Another early double bass song, as you mentioned, which is that was not a lot of that going on in the 70s for a lot of these bands. So here you have obviously Judas Priest with Exciter, the pièce de résistance of the speed metal stuff. But this song is kind of down that similar road. Martin mentioned it in his intro as well. It's a kind of an early speed metal song, which is really interesting because you wouldn't equate Foghat with speed metal, but that's why I love doing this podcast, because I love to point things out that people might not know. And again, all of these songs are the benchmark of what has made heavy metal what it is.
Think about how difficult it would have been to make this song in 1978. You've made records. You understand. It's like to get that kind of clarity and tightness out of a band, recording to tape in 1978 would be incredibly difficult. And it would not surprise me if they tracked mostly live. Most bands did at that time. It was just sort of how you did it. A lot of the tape machines, you couldn't even do punch-ins. You could only cut tape if you wanted to go between things, which then made overdubbing difficult. Pretty amazing feat. And I don't think people appreciate that. Even now doing double bass, you have to fix it. You have to tweak things. Volumes change. When a drummer's on single foot is one volume, double bass is a different volume. Just dealing with that in the mix alone, let alone recording it, must have been a huge challenge.
Yeah, we talk about a lot of that here because it is very difficult producing heavy metal, because you've got everything is in that low mid register, the kick drums, the bass, the guitars, and even the vocals if you're getting to death metal style vocals. This one was too really tricky because, as you mentioned, the bass, Rod Price, by the way, shout out to him, amazing bass player. Yes. The bass is so prominent in this, and trying to get the bass and the double kick drums to be able to hear them properly is not easy at all.
No.
To do, especially when the bass is that up in the mix. Hence, you have And Justice for All. There's hardly any bass on there, but boy, you can hear those kick drums nice and loud, can't you?
You sure can. And look, as making records, sometimes you make a decision. Where's my low end going to come from? Sometimes it comes from the bass, sometimes it comes from the drums. And I think in a case like this, they chose the bass. It's very present in the mix. It's supplying the roundness. That's where most of it's coming from, which is, I think, was to Eddie's benefit that the bass player was so prominent that this record has this nice bottom end, because I would think at that time, if you're going to do double bass, you probably have to go for a slightly thinner drum sound, especially the way analog tape reacts to transients, how hard you hit it. If you're doing double bass on analog tape, you cannot go nuts with bottom end. You're not going to have sub kick mics and all this modern crazy stuff that we do now. It's just not going to happen. It's probably one microphone a foot out of the bass drum and hope for the best,
Yeah, 100%. So that's why the production was so important. And I mean, look, for whatever the problems were in the studio, I think Eddie absolutely nailed this record.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it's interesting that he did it over in England too, which is I don't know. Well, obviously he did Pink Floyd, but I don't know that he did a lot of stuff over in England. How difficult is it for you to go to a new studio and get in there and get comfortable with it and be able to get good sounds out of it?
It's interesting you ask that, because I've done that tremendous amount in the last 3 years. I've made almost every record I've made in the last 3 years, I've made overseas, whether it's Sweden, Germany, Finland, England. If the room is good, I don't care what gear is in there. I'm not one of those people where, I got to have this console, I got to have these mics. And there's a few things I would love to have, of course, and I travel with a little bit of stuff, but I can make a record really anywhere. I made an Avatar record in the forest in a cabin with a Soundcraft live console. Turned out great. So, you can do it if the band is killer. And I've gotten into situations where I've gone into rooms overseas and, the room wasn't great. But I have that problem more in America, I would say, where the drum rooms are too small or too dead. especially in Hollywood. There's so many dead small rooms from the 70s that are classic, and lots of great records were made there, but not for what I want to do, where I want a big drum sound or whatever. So I've found places in Europe that I really like, that I know I can get great sounds in. I tend to try and go back to those places multiple times if possible. But I love traveling to make records because it gets me out of the home headspace. I'm fully focused on the record. I can work 7 days a week. Just, you're not distracted, by your life.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And that's why a lot of times bands want to go record away from where they live, because same thing, you've got all the distractions. So that's a common thing, especially if bands are using studios now, which I still love that. And I encourage as much of that from our bands as I can, because, well, it's great to make a record at home and it's convenient, and you want to do something at 3 or 4 in the morning, you just get up and do it. I understand all of that stuff. The other thing too, this is a big problem that I have now. When people make records in their home, there's no ticking clock. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for them to ever finish the record. And we have several of these situations now. If you know Metal Blade, you know who I'm talking about. It's just going on and on and on because there's no clock ticking. I almost want to tell them, we just go in the studio for like 3 weeks and get this thing done so it's finished and there's a deadline and a clock ticking.
I love deadlines. I make my best records under deadlines. Having just finished a record that took almost 3 years, it's just, I don't want to do that every time. You start to lose a lot of perspective. So I like to make records in 3 to 5 weeks. Get everybody in the same room if possible, as much as possible. Somebody's always got a good idea. Every idea deserves its 10 or 15 minutes, even if you're skeptical. So Foghat choosing to go into Rockfield with Eddie was probably the reason why this record's so good. They all live together. You just get it done. They probably did it in 2 weeks.
I mean, back in the 70s, a lot of these records, I mean, unless you're Fleetwood Mac or somebody, you're not going to take, a year. Even with Fleetwood Mac, whatever, a year and a half it was, back then, that was an exceptionally long time to make a record. Like, yes. Nobody had made a record that took that long. Usually like 3 or 4 months would be a long time back there. But now, for a variety of reasons, some of these records take 3, 4, 5, 6 years and even more sometimes, which is frustrating as a fan because, you want, like, where's our new music? For me, as a guy running a record label, it's difficult too because it's like, we've put a bunch of money for this record. Can we get it done? But it's also difficult because you can't, the more you push the artist, it's a structure. That's why in those ways, I definitely miss the 70s and 80s a bit when, we're making these records and in a record time. And look, so many of the records we've talked about that's founded and started heavy metal were made in a week, or Black Sabbath a couple of days. It's Zeppelin a couple of days. I mean, it's amazing how these timeless classic records that started an entire movement were recorded in the blink of an eye.
It's fascinating, and I think about it now, like, why is that not happening now? What is the difference? And I mean, there's a lot of reasons, obviously, but the pressure to sound like everybody else is one huge drawback. I had this discussion yesterday about, the top 2 or 3 newer metal bands that have now graduated to arenas. And out of those 3, only one of them sounds unique to me, and that's Ghost, your discovery. And they're still one of my favorites, and I essentially still a band in the studio making great records.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny when I'm thinking about that, I was thinking in the back of my head about Ghost, because there's somebody that Tobias just could make the whole record by himself at his house, but he goes in a studio with the studio musicians and they make these great records. 100%. Again, that's why a song like this is so important to what we call heavy metal now, and why, if you didn't know about Foghat before, you hopefully will know now and go out and check out their stuff, which is really good. A real quick note on that too, and a couple things in the podcast. It's fun to do, and I don't really get into analytics or what it's doing. I just do them because I don't have time for all the other stuff. Recently, I've seen it a few times, but thank you to everybody. We are in the top 5% of podcasts in the world. So thank you guys for that. That's a pretty incredible feat. And another thing that I noticed, so we did the 6 Feet Under podcast with Chris Barnes a few weeks ago, talking about Haunted. And all of a sudden, about 3 days later, I was kind of obsessed with the iTunes charts. I'm always looking at them just to kind of get a gauge of what's going on. And that record was up in the top 50 all of a sudden. So it's like, wow, I guess people listened to the podcast and went back and listened to the album. So thank you guys for that. So hopefully we're doing something right here.
I absolutely think you are. This is great.
Well, and of course, a lot of it has to do with you and all of your great insight. It's always fun to talk to you and talk about this stuff. Much appreciated. I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me again, Brian. I'll speak to you soon.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Kraft Mac and Cheese is better than 90s hip-hop. We'll remind you of your childhood without making you feel incredibly old. Kraft Mac and Cheese. Best thing ever.
All right. It is my honor now to welcome in an absolute living legend, one of the original members of the incredible band Foghat, Mr. Roger Earl. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. This should be fun. I made a couple of notes because those records that you wanted to talk about a long time ago.
Just a couple minutes ago, yeah.
Minutes.
So yeah, we're talking Easy Money, which I'm so happy I gave 3 songs for you guys to pick, and you picked this one, which I was secretly hoping you would, because this one is really an important song when it comes to songs that define heavy metal, because this is just a couple episodes ago, we talked about Exciter from Judas Priest as being kind of the first ever speed metal song. And this song, which came around also in the same year, 1978, Easy Money, is a pretty fast song. And there's a double kick drums. And I mean, this is, again, kind of the blueprint that became speed metal. Like, that was pretty amazing.
We haven't played it in ages. And one of the reasons, I have to be honest, is because our bass player isn't there, Craig McGregor. He and I... But Lonesome Dave got the song together, had the lyrics and everything. But the basic tempo and feel came from myself and Craig McGregor, the bass player. We worked on that and got all the action. So we tried it once or twice, but Craig, he owned that part of the stage in the studio playing bass, especially on that song. I would like to play it. I've suggested it a few times, but we got 18, 19 albums out. So we got a lot of stuff to pick from.
A big catalog.
Yeah, big catalog. But yeah, it was a lot of fun making that record. We spent some time over it. We had the RCA unit. We rented the Woolworth Mansion out here on Long Island. In fact, I believe Linda, my wife, our manager, who was the office manager at the time, actually rented it. So it was a pretty cool place. There was nobody there, big organ in a huge room. Eddie Kramer was the producer on the album. I shouldn't say too much about that because we had some issues. Very arrogant person. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I don't want to touch too much on it, but it's interesting because, obviously Eddie was riding high doing Kiss, and it was a real interesting choice for him to produce the record. And I mean, I know that there wasn't the best experience for you guys with Eddie recording the record. However, just from a fan's point of view, I think it's a brilliant record, and I think it sounds actually really, really good.
Well, that's because we mixed it, the band. What happened was we got to the mixing stage. We went into the studio, into the RCA mobile unit and started listening. I said, hold on a second, Eddie, put my drums, solo the drums. I said, and we need to work on the 2 toms, the rack and the floor tom. He said, well, I've mixed them all down to 1 track. I said, without me being here?
Oh,
first day of mixing and you do that? How many other tracks have you? Well, I did this one and this one and this one. I said, hold on a second. And that was the start of it. No, the band actually mixed it on the road.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we...
That's not easy.
No, it wasn't easy. We knew what we wanted. But yes, the engineers that Eddie worked with were fantastic. But for some reason, he decided to berate them every morning he came in. I shouldn't really go on about this, but he was such an asshole. He really was. He treated... The engineers are really cool. They're the ones who sort of do all the stuff. And he was like shouting at them and berating them and walking his dog. Anyway, enough of that. Easy Money. What a great fucking track.
Amazing. And like I said, you mentioned earlier the bass line, and the bass line in this song is brilliant. I mean, absolutely brilliant.
Right.
Martin Popoff at the start of the show, who's written over 150 books about hard rock and heavy metal, by the way, so he knows his stuff. He was going on about how great this song is as well, and also that the bass in this song is kind of the hidden highlight of it, because it really drives the song.
It is. That's why I said at the very beginning when we started talking about it, Craig McGregor was the bass player, and he owned that part of the stage when we played live. But on that song, he and I spent a lot of time like working on stuff, anticipation, and the real tempo, because there's some really sort of, well, for us at the time, intricate changes. And then Dave and Rod came in once we sort of figured out what we were doing. Yeah, Craig McGregor put his stamp all over that song. I miss him. He was my brother by a different mother. I loved him.
Where did the double kick drums come in? Had you used them before, or is that a new thing for Foghat at that time?
I always had them. Most of the time, to be perfectly honest with you, a drummer really only needs one. But that song, it was like, because you could, it was a good idea, and it worked easily on it because you had that sort of thing going underneath all the time. Most of the time, I don't use them in studio. Live, I use them occasionally. They're just there to make noise and have fun.
Yeah. Well, back in 1978, double kicks were not a common thing in rock music, really. So, what is interesting when it was started coming out and the song started getting faster, that you were using the double kicks.
I've had double kick drums since I joined Savoy Brown. Not that I didn't use them a lot, just use them on maybe 2 or 3 songs. Or if I did a drum solo, hopefully it makes some nice noises. Most of the time, one bass drum's enough, but drummers are notoriously greedy.
Are you aware of just how influential Foghat was? I mean, really, I talk a lot about the 1970s on this show, because that's when I grew up in the 70s. And to me, and to all of the bands that came after the 70s and the 80s and 90s and all the way up until now, really the 70s, that was the essence, the beginning, the foundation of heavy metal. Are you guys aware of how influential you are to so many bands, Metallica and, on and on?
It's always enjoyable, and I guess I'm pleasantly surprised anytime I meet fellow musicians and they talk about that and say that stuff to me, and it makes you feel really good. But being personally aware of it, not really, because I love to play. That's why I'm still doing it. I'm going to play until I have to have another double hand transplant or something. I love to play. I always wanted to play in a band. Sitting down practicing you have to do that, but playing in a band is what it's all about. Songs like that are just such a gas to play. It's like all of a sudden you can rip it.
Yeah, I mean, so amazing. And when I go back and listen to that song again, I realize wow, that song I mentioned it before, for the late 70s, that was a pretty fast song. And it was also a little bit different for Foghat too. It kind of had a little bit of a progressive feel to it too. Like you mentioned, a lot of different changes, which, wasn't quite the case all the time.
With Foghat, we created songs. Dave was the main songwriter. Rob was the lead guitar player and brilliant side player. Craig McGregor and I were the rhythm section, except when Nick Jameson played with us for a year, who's our longtime producer, produced the Fall for the City album and the live album. That's another story. You make songs. You have a song and you play the song what the song needs. It's not like we have to be a heavy metal band. We have to be a blues band. We have to be a rock band. We're all that, but jazz too. And I love soul music and gospel music. I remember a number of times Dave and I would listen to gospel music. It's about the music. And yes, my passion is blues and rock and roll. That's what I grew up listening to. Jerry Lee Lewis was the first. I was 12 years old. I went to see Jerry Lee Lewis. My father took me to see him in southwest London at Mitcham Majestic. I'm 13 actually. And I was with my best friend who was a bass player. I was just practicing at the time. And it was like, whoa. I couldn't play piano. My brother was playing piano, older brother, and my dad played piano, but drums, they're louder than pianos.
Yeah, much. That's amazing. You know, you mentioned jazz, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, and that's one thing that, you know, I wasn't as aware of when it comes to influences in rock, and certainly heavy metal. I mean, heavy metal was built on the blues and classical. That's the two biggest influences. But jazz, especially the drummers, the first guy that brought this up is my favorite metal drummer of all time, Dave Lombardo from Slayer. And we're just talking about the way he plays, and he has a different feel to the way he plays, which makes him so unique. And he mentioned, you know, he's from Cuba, and he was listening to a lot of that stuff growing up, but also listened to a ton of jazz. And so many drummers in both rock and metal have talked about how jazz was such a big influence. I didn't really realize it until now, and it's amazing that so many drummers like yourself as well would bring that up.
When you learn to play drums, unless you're completely self-taught, I started playing when I was 12. That's when I started playing. I got a drum teacher. I worked 3 nights a week after school. Saturday mornings, I worked in a bakery. And Saturday afternoon, I'd ride my bike over to my drum teacher. His name was Chris Hewitt. Also, I believe the Kinks drummer, he taught him as well. And my book was Buddy Rich's Drum Rudiments by Henry Adler. And it's like, you know, it's like swing. It's and you know, if you can't play a shuffle, you shouldn't be in a rock and roll band anyway. My dad would play some big band records. I think that was like you know, like after the war, the GIs brought some really cool stuff over, and then you'd find it in record stores. And I remember Dad playing some big band music, and it was like, whoa, this is a drummer. Yeah, all that stuff. And jazz, any drummer who probably plays anywhere has sat down and done his jazz rudiments. I've forgotten a lot more than I ever learned. It's all about feel. Playing in rock and roll, I mean, you don't, with a jazz band, often you're playing, you know, with a piano, bass, even when you've got horns in the band, you still got to be light and listen to the music, listen to the vocalist, listen to, you know, whatever lead guitar is playing. And so it requires a lighter touch, which I'm not noted for. What is it? What did Nick Jameson call me once? Itamard.
Well, hitting hard is a good trait to have if you're a drummer, for sure. Yeah. I love that you mentioned the fact that you just play music, and you know, it's nice when you hear the influence. You just play music, and we did. I was lucky enough to reissue 5 Thin Lizzy records when we were at Warner Brothers in the early 90s, one of my all-time favorite bands.
Great band.
Yeah, and one of my favorite bands of all time. And we, you know, we did a bunch of stuff with Scott Gorham, and I was on a podcast with him years ago, and I was talking to him. I said, "Are you aware that like every single metal band, whether it's a death metal band or a regular metal band, all influenced by Thin Lizzy?" And he had no idea. He was like, you know, even like young kids, he was like shocked. I go, absolutely. And it's the same with Foghat. You walk up to a death metal band like Cannibal Corpse and talk Foghat, and they'll talk your ear off about how much they love Foghat. But I love the fact that you're just kind of like, okay, it's nice that we do, but I do it because I play music. And I think that's ultimately what most artists will say.
That's what it's about. You're playing music. If you're going to get up there and just wail and not listen to what's going on, you're not going to be a lot of fun to work with or play with. You know, our long time, Brian Bassett has been in this band 30 years. He actually played with Rod Price and Lonesome Dave, our original musicians as well. He said, playing music is like having a conversation. Well, with me, it might be a loud conversation, but it's the truth. You're talking to each other. That's what you do. I'm seriously hearing challenged. I have 2 hearing aids. I don't wear them when I play, of course. That was part of the problem, but I can still hear everything. They've got Marshalls.
Yeah.
You're playing as a band. You play together. It's not one person. You're a band. And Foghat was always like that, right from the very beginning, as Savoy Brown was when it came to playing. And I think that's one of the reasons I got the job in the first place with Savoy Brown. And it's one of the reasons I'm still playing, because I love to play. I love to be creative, either new music. I mean, I don't get tired of playing I Just Want to Make Love to You with the way we play it. I don't get tired of playing Slow Ride or Fall for the City or Stone Blue, I have a fucking great time. It's fun.
That's why I think everybody does it in the long term, is they do it for themselves and because they love to play and because it's a lot of fun. And us as fans, obviously we appreciate that because we get to enjoy all of that. So this may or may not be, this may be a compliment or maybe a non-compliment. I used to do a radio show in Phoenix in the 1990s, and I had Foghat on. And I wasn't in the studio because I was going to see a show somewhere or something or other. So I was calling in to talk to you guys. And I'd seen Foghat at that point, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 times. But it never dawned on me until I started talking to you guys that you guys were British. I always thought you were like from the South because that had that Southern blues rock feel. So when you're talking, I go, oh, that's right. I forgot these guys are actually from England.
We do come from the South.
Yeah.
South London.
Yeah, South London, exactly.
My parents came from the East End of London, but I grew up in Hounslow, southwest London, and in central London. That was where I sort of hung out.
But I thought it was the south of the United States.
I know. It was interesting. We on compilation records, they put Foghat tunes on there. I'll say that as a compliment because that means the way we're creating music, the way we created music and played it, it's been accepted on blues aficionados. We get played on Bluesville. We get played on heavy metal. And some of our newer stuff getting played on country stations. And I think that's really cool. That, in fact, because that's what you want to do. You want to reach people. You want to entertain. You want them to say, wow, especially like one of the songs we do. It's an Elmore James song, I guess. It Hurts Me Too, which is a slow blues. And and I'm playing it in a really light, but our singer, Scott, and also Lonesome Dave, when he used to sing it, people are blown away by it because it emotes. And that's what you've got to try and do. Some songs you don't emote, you're doing them. They're what they are. They're all different. They're all individual. And I think, like I said before, that's what you do. You treat the music, the song, as a song, and I play accordingly to what I think is right. So far, I'm still here and still in a band.
Yeah, you're doing a good job on there. You're doing it successful. That's exactly the way it should be. You mentioned the crossover of country, which is really interesting because just like a lot of metal heads, like heavy metal bands are influenced by rock and roll, especially 70s rock and roll. So it's country big time. I mean, I'm friends with all the guys in Morgan Wallen's band, and they're all huge metalheads. And so many people that work for his crew, and same thing with Hardy and, Jelly Roll. It's really interesting that the whole Taylor Swift bass player is his favorite band is Slayer. So, I mean, there's a lot of metal and rock and roll bleeding into country. So it kind of makes sense that's kind of where things go.
And a quick story. When I was 12, 13, my older brother was 4 years older than me, Colin. He was learning to play piano, and he's a Jerry Lee Lewis fan, as I became. But Sun Records also had B.B. King, did his first records there, and Johnny Cash. Now, my brother got a Johnny Cash album, his early stuff. As a 13-year-old kid riding his bike to school in Hounslow, singing Johnny Cash songs. Nobody in my school knew who he was. Yeah, she loves you, Big River, more. Well, no more singing. But I loved Johnny Cash, even though he didn't have a drummer. There was always this terrific rhythm going through it. Luther Perkins on guitar, and there's a story. Now I'm growing up in southwest London, and I hear these stories that are like, I don't know, were magic to my ears. High as the water, mama, 3 feet high and rising. I'm like, as you can tell, I'm a fan of my adopted home. Always have been ever since I can. There was some magic about America. There is magic about America. America has given music to the world to this day. All the beautiful combinations of music come together. And that's because we have this beautiful society from all over the world. And that's what makes us great, to me anyway.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And the comedian Jimmy Carr talks about that. Somebody mentioned to him, why is British music so good? And he goes, well, we just took what you guys did in America and we just repackaged it and sold it back to you, which really is kind of a brilliant way to think about it.
It's true. all the English musicians were impressed by American musicians, drummers, the music, horn players, piano players, vocalists. Every single one of them came out of that 60s, 70s era. They would all say the same thing, I think.
Yes. Oh, you're 100% right. I read autobiographies when I'm flying around, so I've read almost all of them. And one of the best is Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac, and he mentions that too. That he got into all of that, all the American blues and all this American music. And it's sort of funny story about one of the first times Fleetwood Mac came to America, and they're playing, some 10,000 seat arena, and like Muddy Waters is down the street playing like an 800 seat club. And he's like, "This is backwards. Like we should be playing the club. He should be playing the arena." So, but you're 100% right. That's where so many of all those great English bands, they grew up listening to American blues, and that's what kind of begat all of this stuff.
That's right. And in fact, one of the things from early days, even the Savoy Brown days and Foghat days, Lonesome Dave and myself and Rod would always make sure that the writers had full credit. We would always praise them. And the really cool thing, the wonderful thing for me, I should say, is that I got to meet a bunch of my heroes. I met Muddy Waters. I jammed with him. I was in his band. I met Willie Dixon. I met a whole bunch of the drummers, like Francis Clay. I didn't meet Francis Clay, but Freddie Belo, Francis Clay, DJ Fontana, I met him as well.
Yep.
It's like I got to meet these people, the singers, the musicians, and jam with them. And that's the magic of music. It's
incredible when you get to meet those sort of people. And, same thing being in the music business, I've been lucky to meet all of my heroes too. And it's just, it's always a lot of fun. And it's the thing that bounds us all together. We're all just fans. And that's what I love about the rock and metal communities. We're all just fans, whether it's Metallica or some small band, we're all still just fans. And we kind of act that same way when we're around each other, which is awesome.
Fortunately for me, I never forgot how to be a fan. That's the reason you play music, because it inspired me. I've been blessed and I'm very grateful, for what's happened throughout, my career. But it's like, I also think the word luck, I don't use it. It's like, it's all I wanted to do. I mean, when I was initially started playing, I mean, I had to work. I left school when I was 15. I'd already bought my drum kit because I'd saved up because I worked after school. But cymbals were expensive. So I had to have a job. I was a commercial artist, but it was always about playing. I had to leave early sometimes, and they go, "Where are you going, Roger?" I have to leave early. It's like a family matter. It's private. I can't really talk about my mum like this. I lied.
Well, it was a good thing to do. It was a means to an end, right?
Yeah, it's all I ever wanted to do. And sometimes my relationships suffered a little bit because playing music was the most important thing. Without it, I was not going to earn enough money fishing.
Yeah.
That's another expensive sport.
Yes.
So, as a race car driver, I would never have made it. I guess you could call it being selfish, but I don't think anybody really became successful probably at anything unless you really cared about what you were doing. And if you have that, I mean, most people have to work, go to work and do a job. And thank goodness for that. But my job is to play drums in a rock and roll band, and I'm very pleased with myself.
Yeah, that's a good gig to have. And you're 100% right about loving it, especially in this business. People ask me all the time, what advice would you give me? I'm starting out either it's in a band or, trying to get into the business somehow. I go, if you really love it, if you love the music and you love what you want to do, then do it. If you don't, it's not an easy business. It's a really difficult business, and it's tough, and you've got to really love what you're doing.
And keeping a band together.
Yeah.
That's hard, in between like finances. I'm okay at the moment because I married well. One of our bands, Linda, our manager, my wife, is just fantastic the way she deals with people and works. She works constantly working. But one of our fans said, "Hey, Rog, you married up." And I took that as a compliment because I did.
You should. And I cannot thank you enough for doing this. I really appreciate it. You truly are a legend. It's an honor for me to sit down and talk to you about this amazing song and the amazing career and life you've had.
Yeah, it is. We're working on a book. We're working on a documentary. I don't know when it's going to get finished. We've got thousands of hours of film and stuff. And the book is reams, and we've gone through 3 or 4 different writers. I think we settled on one now. Really good guy. Writing a book is like, I don't know, it seems like it's the end. But
it's funny you mentioned that, because I've written 2 books now. And yeah, the first time that I wrote it, people were like, you should really write a book about the history of the label. I'm like, but don't you do that when you're like over, when it's all kind of, but people do want to hear about it now. And the books did, and same thing for any musician that's done this.
I read Keith Richards' book, and he did it so well. It was funny, that the stuff he said, but I'm saying to myself, I've got 3 daughters, and I don't think I could talk about this stuff, but they're all grown. So I suppose I've just got to get over that.
Yeah. You do have to tread lightly a little bit sometimes, but it's all good. Well, I look forward to books and documentaries about Foghat. And your life would be amazing. So I'll sign up for that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, but we're working on it. It's a work in progress. We're doing good.
Again, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it. And take care. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to meeting you.
That'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much to Roger Earl, original member of Foghat. Really cool talking to him. Jay Ruston, is always, about the production. And of course, Martin Popoff, his great contributions as always. Lizzie Borden for our theme song, and Christian Blatt, the producer who makes the whole thing go. We'll see you guys next episode.